Well, hey there, how you doing? This is Irony of the Lakes, but it's not that important. Hey, how you doing? It's me, Kitty Cat, here to talk to you about some spiritual stuff. Today, I was going to talk a little bit about emptiness as well as interconnectedness and how I think they are actually very similar, but kind of just different points of view. Uh, so a lot of us have maybe heard of the term emptiness, especially in reference to Buddhism, where there's a lot of focus in Mahayanan and Vajrayanan schools on like the idea of emptiness, but you may not actually know what emptiness really implies. Oh, what the heck? Okay, I don't know what happened there, but anyway. Uh, so basically, the easiest way to sum up what emptiness is, and I believe I've talked about this a little bit before, but emptiness is basically the idea that everything is empty of an essential nature and that everything is like interdependent on each other. So basically, like a rock doesn't have the purpose, like doesn't have like the nature of being a rock. It is a bunch of different. It's like a conglomeration of a bunch of different things coming together. There is no one thing that makes it a rock. It is. It is essentially empty of nature. Same thing with humans. Humans are conglomeration, and all things are basically these conglomerations of various different. Oh my gosh, my nose is so itchy. Of these various different things coming together. And that's just a single item. Emptiness, if you expand it out, is not just about the emptiness of the single item, it is about the emptiness of all things. Because basically, okay, so if you're empty, and these things are empty, and everything else is empty, that means that emptiness is all pervasive. That everything is empty. Everything is empty of like a singular nature that it is like completely independent on. Everything is codependent on one another. Everything relies on a conglomeration of things to come together and form a singular solid idea of what something is. And even then, those things are ever changing. There's never anything that is like truly permanent, and it is all constantly changing. Of course, this is from a Buddhist perspective. And as you may know, Buddhists don't really believe in a creator deity. I mean, they can, but like the Buddha doesn't talk about it anywhere in like his early sermons. In early Buddhism, it's not really mentioned. There's some stuff mentioned in some later Mahayanan texts and things like that. But there is no mention of like a creator deity that like does all these things, or a soul. The soul is not really something that Buddhists believe in. And this does lead to questions like what reincarnates, because most Buddhists believe in reincarnation of some sort. So what reincarnates? Is it actually us, or is it basically just like the idea that our energy or like, whatever goes up to making up us is just going to go into something else later on? And there's a lot of debate on that. Now, I personally think the idea of emptiness is very interesting because once you pull it apart, it does make a lot of sense. Like, the idea is that nothing really has... Hey. I'm busy talking about emptiness here, you silly Billy Banana Nanopopilly. And now you're going to be empty. Extra empty. But you could also see why this would directly contradict with something like Hinduism. In Hinduism, the idea in almost every sect is that you have a soul, and either that soul is like a fragment of God, is related to God, or, everything is God. And if that's the case, then how can things be empty if God is within everything? And there are centuries and centuries of debates going back and forth between these two different perspectives. And, before Buddhism kind of died in India, it still exists in India, just not very many. But before basically Buddhism died in India and more or less migrated to other places and became more popular there were lots and lots of debates on this stuff. And it still kind of remained as a bit of a debate, just not like a super important one. Or like, well, not that it wasn't important, but it became less prominent in the debate halls. And it's very interesting to see this idea, because this idea also would oppose many religious movements, because it would also oppose things like, you know, most Abrahamic traditions, which hold to some idea of a soul. It did also, like, the idea of emptiness, when it was misunderstood by early Westerners coming to India and, you know, Asia. It was early, at first it was misunderstood, and basically they believed that Buddhists were nihilists. They just didn't believe in anything. That's not true, but they do believe in this idea of emptiness. Which, I guess if you didn't understand it, I could kind of see how you might interpret it as some sort of nihilism, but it's just really not. So that's kind of interesting. Now, necessarily speaking, though, I don't actually think that emptiness by itself really contradicts Hinduism, or at least doesn't contradict things like Advaita Vedanta and Kashmiri Shaivism. See, the idea that everything is empty of a self nature, in the sense that it is not, there is no one thing that makes up, like, the entirety of, hey, are you gonna attack me? Don't do that. That makes up, like, the entirety of what is you, or what is any particular creature, or whatever, right? Like, if you really look into it, in a way, it can actually kind of support the idea of Hinduism. Because if the idea of Hinduism is that everything is ultimately Brahman, and everything is interdependent, or interconnected with Brahman, or Brahman is everything, then emptiness actually makes a lot of sense. Because then you're just looking at it from slightly different perspectives, right? Because if you look at it from the emptiness perspective, then everything is empty. But on the other hand, if you look at it from the Hindu perspective, it's like, oh, okay, everything's full because everything's interconnected. What we're describing here, though, is kind of the same thing. We're describing the emptiness of an independent, of a completely independent existence. We are describing the existence of all these codependent things. And if everything's codependent, they can still fit together. Now, of course, I would say that you shouldn't take that as, like, officially what Buddhists think, like, because you probably wouldn't get a Buddhist to believe in, like, the soul or Hinduism by just saying, well, hey, you see, it's just a different perspective. You probably wouldn't do that. I mean, and they'll probably be polite and talk to you about it. You know, it is interesting. But the thing that also makes this very interesting to me is that the more I've delved into, well, lately it's been a lot of Vajrayana practice, but and at first, when I was first interested in Buddhism, it was at first very interested in, like, early Buddhism as I had understood it. I think it's important for folks to understand there is some debate about whether or not there really is a early Buddhism, and how much we can actually, like, reconstruct of early Buddhism. You do get channels like Doug's Dharma, which I would definitely recommend to check out, who is a firm proponent of early Buddhism, but there's also a lot of people who think that the idea of early Buddhism is maybe a little bit fanciful, partially because we have very little written down about Buddhism, and especially the Buddha's early teachings, until hundreds of years after the Buddha's death. So right off the bat, how can you really know that something is early Buddhism? There's, you know, you could say that, then there's a variety of ways that people will come up with. For instance, like, people have used the Agamas, which is basically the Buddha's teachings, or like the early Buddhist teachings translated into Chinese and used by the Mahayanans. And then you have the Pali Canon used by Theravada schools and things like that, which is kind of its own separate thing. And there is some.
Please, no. Dear me.
I'm not gonna hurt you, my guy.
I haven't a clue. No secrets lie with me, not a one. Oh, please leave me be.
I like how when he talks, he just has his mouth open.
Well, I will finish. The curse, we beg you. You must keep it out. And if you should meet the young Albinore, then please give it to a chosen lad. The medallion, it's only but for dear.
Okay, yeah, sure. Anyway, there is some debate about whether or not, you know, early Buddhism is a thing, and, you know, like I was saying, how can you even really truly know what the Buddha originally taught? I would argue that you can't actually know originally what the Buddha taught. You can read the earliest stuff we have, and like I said, that was the Agamas and the Pali Canon. You can compare the two, see what is in both, see what's maybe in one rather than the other. There's a variety of ways you can try to do it. Whether or not it's effective and worth doing, that is a separate question. But the more I've explored Vajrayana Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism, for instance, the more I've found that I think that there's actually a lot of things that line up with Hinduism, and it's actually been very useful for my practice. Using Vajrayana practices for like deity yoga, for instance, where you focus on a particular deity, and then you like have it, hey, I was talking. You silly Billy. And then, you know, basically the idea with deity yoga is that you focus on an image of the deity, whatever your chosen deity in this case is, and you think about the aspects of the deity, the description, their characteristics, and you like kind of slowly morph it over to your own body and things like it. It's pretty interesting. As well as meditations on emptiness and all these other things. And I have personally found that meditations on emptiness have actually gotten me to understand, at least I feel like I understand. Is there a reason this is here? Maybe it's just trying to trick you. I don't know. I feel like I have come to understand certain parts of like Hindu belief and practice a bit better. I feel like I've grown just in certain ways. It's pretty interesting. Now, the idea of interconnectedness is in a way similar to the idea of emptiness, like I said. If everything is interconnected, then nothing has a singular being. The major dispute between these two ideas really boils simply down to, is it empty in the sense that there is nothing there, or is it actually full in the sense that there is one thing that pervades all things? Now, I've come to believe that it's one thing that pervades all things. I've come to believe that in Brahman, and I've come to believe that, you know, God pervades all things. It simply makes more sense to me. The more I've meditated, that's like the thing that goes closer to my own experiences. And at a certain point, it's like, well, if you're not going with your experiences, I'm not sure 100% sure what you're going with. But going with this, it's been rather interesting to go back and forth between Buddhist texts and Hindu texts and like see the arguments and things. Where to me, I would also argue that a lot of it is not super relevant. It's like the sort of thing that like philosophers would probably engage in. But I do think it's important for us to understand these ideas because they can really help shape the way you view the world. Once you realize that everything is empty and ever-changing, or that everything is interconnected and ever-changing, you know, like, even minor troubles are minor troubles, but also big troubles are suddenly far less of an issue, right? Because if you can... Hey, get back. There we go. Because, and I mean, there's a variety of reasons for that, right? But if everything is ever-changing and empty or interconnected, whatever, either or, then even large problems, you know, they're but temporary things. You don't need to worry about like the doom of all things. You don't need to worry about, oh my gosh, this is going to ruin me forever, because everything is passing and transient. And I think that this is important, not just for Buddhism, of course, but also for Hinduism, partially because it's a very important way to look at the world. To understand that, like, you know, all these things that we're after are transient. And both Buddhism and Hinduism would agree, for instance, that, like, you know, simply gathering wealth or gathering material possessions, it is a temporary satisfaction. You know, certain parts of Hinduism or Hindu schools would probably argue that it's at least somewhat important to get money and stuff when you're young, just so that you can you know, when you're older, have money to really pursue like religious practices and stuff like that. And, you know, like really dedicate yourself to those sorts of things. And a lot of these ideas become very important because, you know, you realize that clinging onto any of these things, wealth, money, power, cars, whatever the heck you're after, material goods, clinging onto these material goods, once you realize that they're empty, but empty, and that they are ever going to, they're only, hey, ow. Jeez. I think I have a lot of health, huh? And, oh, there you go. Thank you. But once you realize these things, it kind of sets your mind on the right goal. When you focus on, like, let's say that you're, you know, full of lust for material possessions. Once you start to realize that those material possessions are only going to give you temporary satisfaction, not give you true satisfaction, they become less desirable, and you start to realize that it's better to move away from some of them, or maybe it's better to, you know, it's better to go after something more permanent. Now, the Buddhists would tell you that you're going after nirvana. You know, Vaidans and Kashmiri Shaivites and things like that would say that you're going after God. You're going after that connection to the divine. You're really, and you know, it's actually the same thing with a lot of other groups, like, you know, this also works for something like Christianity or like Islam or something, where you realize that the thing that you're really going for is you want to go for the thing that is permanent. You want to go for the thing that will last and is worth your time and effort. And, you know, and that's not to say that you know, a lot of us are going to be kind of like in between. We're not going to be completely ascetic and only going after God, but it can also help you, even if you're like not living an ascetic life, to see, you know, these things that will tempt you in the right light. And you can see that they are, you know, kind of hollow, and that they only give this temporary satisfaction, and it is much more important to pursue these much longer term goals. And heck, even if you don't believe in like God or whatever, you can use these sort of this sort of understanding to look for something much more satisfying to you, even in like a completely secular life. You know, you can meditate without like necessarily having the goal of like God realization or whatever, sure, but I would argue that, you know, it's still a better goal. But, you know, your life, man, lady, others. And, you know, it's very important because it also puts everything into perspective. And once you get that perspective, because in Buddhism, and I would argue Hinduism, although Hinduism is less codified with this exactly, but having right view, one of the part which is a part of the Eightfold Path, having right view, having the right understanding of like the material reality and the spiritual reality of things around you, understanding the fleeting nature of things is kind of an essential part on almost any spiritual path, I would argue. I think it can really help you understand what you're going for and why. And it can also be a good motivator, because once you realize, oh, all of these material things are going to fade, I should pursue something better. Like that's a good motivator to push forward. And, you know, it's kind of like the whole idea of like death and reincarnation, where like a lot of people, if they believe in reincarnation, you know, it can give them the idea of like, oh, I want to be a good person just so I can live a better life. My next life can be a better life. Or it might be something as simple as, you know, they want to end the cycle of reincarnation kinds of things. and these various different paths and ideas intersect and give you a good connection and understanding. And you can get into the nitty gritty of Mac. You can get into the nitty gritty of what exactly does it mean to in your personal life for this stuff to be empty. Is it true? You can examine it and think about it, you know. And I would highly encourage anybody who is interested in this stuff to examine things like the concept of emptiness and examine... Hey, don't smack my horse. Sir. That's rude. Smacking horses is rude. You know. Examine it and think about it in your own life. It can also actually be kind of interesting to think about this to, because even if you think about this in terms of, like, goddesses or images of God and things like that, like, does Krishna exist by himself, or is Krishna interdependent on Brahman? Or, you know, like, same thing with Kali. Kali is this image that we can use in our worship to connect with God, but, you know, in a way that image comes from us, and it's a way that we can, like, look at the world and understand, you know, the divine, and put it into ways that we understand it. And, you know, if you can understand the whole idea of these things not having this essential nature, and that the real essential nature is beyond all these descriptions and is in fact God, you know, it kind of helps you also understand that, like, yeah, I love the image of Kali and I love praying to Kali, but what I'm really praying to is the essence of God, and that this is merely the image I use to communicate with God and communicate the idea of God, put it in a way that I can box it up and understand it, rather than like some, oh, this is like the actual only way to see God, you know. That it's like we all have these different ways of approaching the divine, and they have various different uses for us. And I think it's very important for us to remember that. Anyway, for right now, that's just kind of what I wanted to say about, like, emptiness and interconnectedness. And I think that they're very interesting ideas and kind of two sides of the same coin, and can help you kind of regardless of your spiritual path if you, like, really stop and think about them. Okay? Anyway, I hope that you all know that God loves you and that I love you, and God bless you all, and have a great day, and bye. I love you. Bye.